Okay, so welcome to my talk. Review, reject, recycle. Note that the images are of varying qualities. From phones over the years, it's all part of the story. And this is Horizon 1, so it's a collage of artworks from the past that I've ripped up. And what I want to do is treat this like an archaeological dig. And we're going to dig down into the stories of these artworks that I've torn up. So let's see what's underneath this one. So this one here is an arrangement of life drawings. That's the basis for it. And you can also see a grid overlaying it a little bit. And it's an oil painting with a bit of soft pastel, I believe. But it ended up being covered to provide the base canvas for Horizon 1. And this, I think, is underneath it. I can't be sure. You kind of lose track about the layers on canvases. This one is called Two Poles. And the reason it's called that is because back in 2007, I had recently moved back to New Zealand and found out that my estranged father possibly had a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, and it got me curious about psychology. And this was one of the paintings I created first when I moved back. And yeah, it got me curious about psychology, but also a bit fearful. I wondered, is it some kind of family trait, something like that? So I had quite strong feelings about this one for a while until I finally covered it again. So if I had just moved back to New Zealand, where had I been? I had been in Michigan. I'd been there for 8 years. We moved over there because my mum had married an American, and I went through intermediate and high school. It was a really good experience because they actually focused a bit more on visual art in school there than they had in my school in New Zealand. That got me started little by little. But after the high school experience, I went to uni, and it was just an alienating experience. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was studying biology. Was I going to end up getting a corporate job? Didn't really feel right. And stuff like the War on Terror was going on at the time. I just didn't feel quite at home there. So something that ended up being a nice connection back to New Zealand was rugby. And this guy here, I don't know if anyone will recognise him, but he played for the Hurricanes. He was my favourite player, and he snapped his leg in a game quite dramatically, and I was quite impressed by his reaction, which was that he was calm and cheerful. And that may not sound like a hard thing to do, but in the States, well, people tended to thrive on drama a bit more. So I just wanted to capture that calmness in this painting. And also, this is another yearning for New Zealand one. It may be hard to see on the screen at the moment, but that's Mount Taranaki in the background, a mountain that I could often see from my hometown of Whanganui, with my face in the foreground. Just wanted to be part of home again. And soon after I came back to New Zealand, I started at the Learning Connection. This was one of my first pieces from there, and it's a first attempt at using the combination of watercolour and gesso on canvas. So I don't know if anyone knows the Red Hot Chili Peppers. This is one of the guys. Yeah. And then at the same time that I was making this, I remember I met someone who was probably one of the more impressive members of the intake that I was part of, and he became art school boyfriend. I didn't ask for permission to show pictures of him. He's not a public figure, so hence the little nice censorship on the eyes there. And we became each other's worlds, living in Stokes Valley, just basically commuting between Stokes Valley and the Learning Connection. But even though that was where we were based, we became estranged from the TLC community, which is too bad because it's a really cool community. So here's another one of them. And I will mention that before this became part of the present pieces, it got overlaid with an experiment of creating a face out of bodies. So some of the kind of flesh tint pieces that you see in these artworks are from that. But this is what it was originally. We had no dramas, and that seemed good enough at the time. And yet, this is a self-portrait from the time. Notice the neutral tones, and they contrast quite a bit to the colourways that I have in these. Things had just come kind of dull for myself, with low confidence, and finally the drama that hadn't been there emerged. We were both young and a bit screwed up, and I wanted to experience more and maybe bring a bit more of that colour back. So this here, importantly, is highlighter and pen on paper. It was drawn at the Learning Connection. I just got a job at the Learning Connection in program support, and there were just tons of highlighters and stuff around. So I used them, possibly when I should have been doing other things, but hey. And this here depicts something that I've found poignant over the years, because I've realised that there are different interpretations of it, different ways to see the symbolism. There's someone over here who becomes obsessed with a stranger, and in wanting to keep them for themselves, hides them away in this weird ocean world thing. But then, after they do that, they realise that they have lost them themselves. And this one here, I remember I was covering at reception, covering a shift, and I just took off my shoes and socks behind reception and decided to draw my feet. Very professional. And notice that we're looking down over an edge. And notice these shapes in sort of this storminess below. Those are sort of bodily pieces. And what I was intending here was just showing the fear of going back out into the wider world, the world of men to be specific, the world of relationships other than the one I had been in. And there's a reason for that fear, because frankly speaking, as a teenager, #me too. Oh shit. Excuse that. Let's put that back on the slideshow. Hey! Sorry, this thing's very sensitive. The beauties of technology. Pause, please. Okay, there we go. And hopefully no more potty mouth. Sorry. So this is a self-portrait in highlighters again. And notice the Learning Connection envelope that I've put it on. Use what there is around you. And I just loved the colours, the way you could overlay those primary colours. I love the transparency, the way that it was applied by pen rather than by brush. It gave you a different sense of control. This is a different kind of highlighter drawing, and can anyone guess the context for this? Well, I will say a piece of advice, guys. If you are thinking of sending nude pics to people on dating apps, make sure that your match isn't an artist first. So the context was that my sister had dared me to try Tinder. Okay, after a year of hesitation, then kind of dating a bit but not really, and lonely, she was like, okay, try this. And it actually was quite inspirational. I ended up doing a series based on photos, their profile photos. It was fascinating the way that people would represent themselves. Of course, this was from a full vanity shot, but I kind of halved it just because it felt right to do. So this guy was a big shot at a design school, and I realised that that was actually a theme that was occurring, that I was being attracted to people in the arts, as if one could absorb the virtues of a stranger through dating, through even just matching with them, through portrait painting, as if one was missing a piece of oneself. This is another example of that series, another creative type, go figure, graphic designer / musician. Yeah, I was getting high off that dating scene, definitely. It was exciting. There were people from all over the world with all kinds of interests. And it was a bit like walking a tightrope though. But amongst all of that, the crazy energy of it, I also learned to start appreciating people's nuances, and actually ended up befriending this guy through some pretty rough times. And here we go again, another art school boyfriend portrait. And I show you this now because the image that ends up in these pieces was a failed Tinder series portrait. It was kind of halfway done, but yeah, I didn't really like it. Of course, no photo of it again, sorry about that, but this was what was originally under it. So this here, note the kind of the darkness of it. I had quit that Tinder phase, but only because of this magical thinking that made me believe that if I quit it, my last favourite date guy would actually get back to me, which of course is silly, but it was necessary to get off that thing, my goodness. It was a bit of a come down though, and during this time I was like a junkie without the drug. Until I met Knight in Shining Armour. So we met at the Learning Connections Creativity Conference actually. He was one of the experts who had come in from overseas, and I was suitably impressed. Note the starry eye motif, that's something that comes back. So I felt seen, we'll put it that way. It was a long-distance collaboration that turned into a long-distance romance, and I was even planning on going to the UK to live with him. It was very serious, very quick, that kind of deal. Although I do remember him looking at this image at the time and saying, well, if that's you and that's me, why am I so small? Like, okay, interesting. So here we go, Notre Dame. This was what we decided as our first step, was romantic holiday in Paris. I do have a highlighter and pen drawing of Notre Dame that I did at this time, but I don't know where it is. I looked for it, don't know where it is, so here we go, let me get a picture that I took. So there was so much on offer at this time, so much promise, allure perhaps, which was generous love, romance, help with one's art career. So, guess how well that went. So halfway into the trip, the vibe dramatically changed, and it kind of brought up demons from the past. And I remember flying over the Alps, very clearly I recall, looking down on the mountains, and also torturing myself by watching Moulin Rouge on the plane. Oh god, melodramatic. But that was an important flight, because this is Kuala Lumpur Airport, and I had a very long stop over there, very long. No phone, because it had been pickpocketed. No tablet, because I'd lost my charger on a flight along the way. So what do? Break out the pen and paper. So this here was a plan. So I didn't just draw I decided to review the doodles that I had done, that I had with me, and look for motifs that showed over and over again. I made a list and put them on each axis of this piece of paper. Things like water ripples and biological patterns, figures, faces, spikes. This here provided me with all the possible recombinations of those motifs. And there's a reason why I did this. So the guy who I had met up with in Paris, being the creativity expert, had clear ideas about what he thought was important, and he mentioned combination, that power of combining things. And I saw that at the Salvador Dali Museum. I wish I had some better pictures of my own. Of course you can't take pictures in there, so this is one from them. But hopefully you can kind of see that on the wall, instead of it being his amazing big paintings, which of course are great, they are his sketches. And you can see his motifs occurring over and over again. And that's something that I really absorbed, that it wasn't just a matter of having amazing, exemplary, huge artworks right away. It was a matter of working up to it. So this is an example of one of the drawing combos that I did, and my Paris guy's recommendation was to do little drawings just to capture ideas. So I actually limited myself both in size, these are A5 bits of paper that I formed into quadrants, and also by time. I would give myself 15 minutes for each one. When the timer goes off, pen and paper down. And I mentioned the starry eyes, well I showed you the starry eyes and Alps drawings a few pictures ago. Those were from these quadrant drawings as well. And I did loads of them. This is just a few. I ended up with a stack like that thick, and then expanded into A4 sizes, and it was very valuable because art definitely has its therapeutic side, and I was going through crises at the time, both that romantic crisis, but also I had developed RSI from doing office work and just couldn't anymore. Turned into a chronic situation, so I needed to leave the full-time proper job as I viewed it, and I faced becoming a beneficiary, which I viewed with a bit of shame at the time, and it was very humbling because I had to change the way that I viewed myself, that I viewed my own value, and in that way it actually helped me to change the way that I saw value in others too. Oh yes, and family influences were also being assessed at the time, so yeah, good to have some art therapy there. So note the objects in the mouth and on the eyes there, actually in the hair as well. So this self-portrait here contains pieces of that moody ink drawing, that post-Tinder ink drawing. I ripped it up and cut it up, and this is the way I reused it. It's actually an important early example of the reusing of scraps, and it felt nicely symbolic at the time, and began to be interested in how one artwork can evolve into another. So this here took inspiration from my new part-time job, which was at an adult shop, and I remember drawing this behind the counter using a porn DVD cover for inspiration. I'm just adding my own twist. And working at that place was actually really fascinating. It got me to reassess my own views on sexuality, other people's views on sexuality, my previous experiences and such. And some of the imagery made its way into other uses. So I mentioned in the description of this talk that revenge was part of it. This could be possibly viewed as vengeful, but really the ultimate revenge was that I didn't send this picture to him, or anything else. It's a ghost made up of his words. So, I rejected the idea of this person as the centre of the universe, which was really quite where they like to place themselves. So I had reviewed and rejected the behaviours I'd learned from my mum in particular, like that Paris experience, because it was someone that she barely knew, going halfway around the world, all based on this fantasy that one can create a new self through romance. And they say that living well is the best revenge. This here was an entry in the, not just an entry, but part of the New Zealand mural competition. And at the basis of it is one of those motif recombination drawings. But in the meantime, I was not definitely ready for that kind of scale. It was a bit like spinning in tornadoes and moving through molasses. This here is a picture of cubistry in manners. It's the corner, and it's a rare foray into landscape. Urged on because it was a commission piece and someone asked for it, and it really helped me to expand what I took on. Although, of course, sometimes I didn't really like the images that I was making, primarily ink on paper at this time, with a bit of colour thrown in. So if I didn't like it, I did something else with it. Again, the reusing of art scraps. And this one was quite fun to make because instead of setting it out knowing where all the components are, I would put them into the face mould and connect them all together, and then when you take it out, that's what you got. It's a surprise. It was actually quite fun. And I also mentioned in the description of the talk tragedy, and well, this one here is about delayed grief. During that brief tender phase, my cat died of cancer, and of course there are more tragic things in the world, but for me it was tragic because I wondered if I could have helped him, maybe could have seen it coming sooner if I hadn't been so distracted. And it was only after the tumultuous year that I could look back and think about it and realise it was sad that I hadn't really been able to fully feel the grief at the time. I just wasn't able. So that previous one had the grid aspect to it. This one involves grids as well, overlaid on an image to affect it. So we've got life drawings and a grid in the shape of golden ratio, so the spiralling rectangles. And that brings a structure to it that I quite like, and I consider it a bit of a peak of the grid usage of this time. And so I decided to use it with other media, such as oil paint. And guess what is beneath this? Yep, another art school boyfriend portrait. And here's another experiment from that time, just sort of an automatic painting. And I think this is what was underneath it from years and years before, back when I was caught up in a time of trying to create worlds. These funny shapes in the middle are a writing system that I devised. I was probably supposed to be doing advanced diploma work for TLC, but was doing this instead. I can't remember what it says. The key for what means what in the writing system is probably on a mostly dead computer I've got somewhere. And this one here I'm weirdly sentimental about. Notice the red. So the red is part of the original painting on there. It wasn't mine. It was actually from a student at the Learning Connection. So the student had given it to a friend of mine who still worked there, and she didn't really have a way to display it, didn't have that much connection to it. She asked me if I wanted it. Yes, please, I would like to remember this person. But I ended up not displaying it either. It just stayed in stacks of canvases in my garage until eventually I covered it with this experiment with oil paint again. So thank you very much to that student. And this one here became the basis for the other one. That's what this other one is over top of. So these images here, these artworks were really addictive to create. They were great because just the meditation of sewing, because everything's sewn on with embroidery cotton. It's just lovely. Just could get into it because I had done the work first of carefully designing these shapes. I'd looked at so many pictures of sunsets and sunrises and did so many digital experiments regarding the composition. But then once I got what I liked, I drew it on and then could kind of intuitively place these pieces. Though I also had to take care with where I wanted the sharp lines. It was fun. And I chose the theme of horizon to fit with this exhibition about further or beyond, because I view a horizon as inviting you to wonder what lies beyond it. And so I hope this talk has communicated the idea that I've really come to appreciate after looking through all my old stuff, which is whether by accident or intent we create our future from pieces of the past. And thank you.